The wealthy, the affluent, the obese upper classes, these were the circles in which Cha Kwan-ho belonged without question. He was a man to whom all those titles applied, someone who had not only entered the world of business, but had dominated it with unmatched discipline and intellect. That was the kind of father Chanoke had known his whole life, a man both revered and feared. As for Chanoke himself, he had been born into that privilege, though not by blood. His life with the Cha family began when his older brother, as a young boy, had once approached their father with an oddly innocent yet impactful request. He had declared that he wanted a little brother, and had phrased it bluntly, demanded to buy him a little brother. At those mere words, without much thought or hesitation, Chanoke had been adopted. He had become part of the family, stepping into the role of younger son and younger brother when he had just turned 5. His father had given him a life overflowing with comfort, luxury, and status, one that could not be compared to anyone else's. His older brother, in those early years, had treated him with warmth and affection, cherishing him more than anything. For a time, they had felt like a truly happy family, one bound together not just by names and photographs, but by laughter, dinners, and the shared image of unity. But that illusion had its limits. As the years passed, the fondness from his brother began to fade. Slowly but surely, the warmth turned lukewarm and eventually cold. The bond that once felt strong became something fragile and awkward. From a young age, Chanoke had felt that something was missing, that some invisible wall separated him from the others. That wall grew thicker and higher with time, until it felt as though he were on the other side entirely. Though they raised him as part of the family, it sometimes felt like they had taken in a stray dog for fun, something temporary, a gesture made out of boredom or curiosity. They did their best to treat him kindly, perhaps because it was their father and brother who had made the decision to bring him in. But kindness, Chano came to realize, was not the same as love. 2 decades later, when he had long since become an adult, he saw his family again. It had been many years. They were brought together not by celebration, but by loss. His father had passed away. Chanok, now a grown man, looked upon the man who had shaped his life in so many ways. Even in death, his father's face remained composed and cold, exactly as he had remembered. Those who gathered at the funeral mourned deeply, their sadness raw and visible. But there was one exception, his older brother, Cha Chan Yol, who showed no sadness whatsoever. His indifference was stark and chilling, and it carried more meaning than words ever could. Not long after the funeral, the truth began to unravel. As news of their father's vast fortune emerged, Chan Yol cut off all contact with everyone, including Chanok. The family, who had once promised to care for him as their own, turned their backs. They shifted their priorities, placing more value on the memory and legacy of their father than on the adopted son, who remained among. Chanok watched in silence as his entire reality crumbled. Just as his father's presence disappeared, so too did every belief he had clung to. The ideals that had guided his actions, his unwavering gratitude, his belief in kindness, and the comforting idea that shared burdens grew lighter, began to dissolve. For most of his life, he had lived selflessly, giving without asking, loving without expecting anything in return. He had believed that joy multiplied when shared and that pain, too, became more bearable when divided. He had not lived in a way that invited criticism or contempt. And yet, the person who first condemned him, the one who struck him hardest when he was down, had been his wife, the woman to whom he had once sworn eternal love. Memories flashed through his mind, sharp and painful. He could still hear her voice, angry and raw, demanding to know how he could still laugh after losing everything. She had shouted at him, her words cutting deep, accusing him of smiling while standing amidst the ruins of his life. In confusion, he had asked her why. If she had ever meant to live for their family, she hadn't fought for them, but her response had left him shattered. Through tears, she had called him a good man, but a fool. She told him he had been deceived and walked away, leaving him alone, finalizing their separation with a divorce. In the present, as he lay in bed, his mind heavy with memories, Chanoke found himself spiraling. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of his phone. It was a call from his son. With a tired voice, he picked up and greeted him, asking what was wrong. Without delay, his son requested a sum of money, 3,000,000 won. The number struck him like a stone. He responded quietly, remarking that it was a large amount, but added that he had many things to pay for. His son pressed again, asking if he truly couldn't arrange it. Chanok replied that he would try to find a way, no matter what. He asked for time and promised to get back to him later that same day. While the call was still active, he glanced at the family photo frame placed beside his bed. It held a picture of him and his son from happier days. Looking at it, he sighed and apologized, whispering to himself that he was sorry for being so incapable. Then, as if resolving something silently, he told his son he would arrange the money and softly added, "I love you." But before he could end the call, he overheard his son speaking with a friend. The friend asked what his father had said, and his son laughed, saying his dad had just told him to wait. Then, with cruel casualness, he added that his ATM was being emotional lately, so the response had been slow. The two boys burst into laughter, mocking the man who had just offered them love. Chanoke ended the call without a word. The sting of betrayal settled heavily in his chest. Deep inside, he had already known why a college student would ask for such a large amount of money. But hearing it spoken aloud with such carelessness confirmed what he had feared, that there was no one left he could truly rely on, no one to turn to, no one who cared. His eyes drifted to another photo frame, this one containing a picture of himself with his father and older brother. He studied the face of the man who had once ruled their world and thought to himself that only someone like his father could find a way out of this. He chuckled bitterly at his own thoughts that why he is really seeking help from someone who was no longer alive. He then looked at his brother's face in the photograph and questioned his own sanity, that who was he thinking of? Maybe he really was going mad. Still, as shameful as it felt, a part of him whispered that he had to try, he had to go to his brother and ask for help. With quiet determination, Chano got up, dressed, and made his way to his brother's house. Upon arrival, he rang the video intercom system. A woman's voice answered, asking who it was. He replied that it was him, Chanoke, and that he was there to see his brother. She responded that his brother wasn't home. Recognizing the voice, he addressed her as his sister-in-law and asked if she had been well. Her response was cool and nonchalant. Just so-so. She followed her greeting with a question of her own, asking what had brought him there so suddenly. She reminded him that they were never close enough for an unexpected visit like this. He hesitated briefly, then replied that things had simply happened that way. With humility, he asked if she could spare a moment of her time. He admitted that he knew he was being shameless and assured her that she could refuse if it was too much trouble. Even so, he pleaded softly for just a little bit of her time, not long, just enough to be heard. His sister-in-law opened it and welcomed him in, suggesting he come inside so they could discuss whether the matter was long or not. She casually mentioned that he could even keep his shoes on indoors. He thanked her politely and stepped inside. She remarked that, in any case, her husband wasn't around at the moment. Glancing at him, she added with a faint smile that she should probably start calling him brother-in-law now. She then noticed the somber expression on his face and questioned him, asking why he looked so gloomy. She wondered aloud why he was acting like that. He looked at her, trying to grasp the point she was making, and asked what she meant. She gave a slight sigh and asked if he truly didn't understand their shared circumstances, motioning for him to sit comfortably on the couch. She went to prepare a drink for him and returned, offering it with a calm expression as she asked, "What's the matter that brought her brother-in-law here?" It was evident that he had come to ask for something, though he was struggling with his pride. She noticed the nervousness and worry in his demeanor and asked him directly what was wrong, adding that something definitely seemed off about him. She also commented that he must have had enough leisure to take his time coming over. Then, out of nowhere, he suddenly blurted out a request. He asked her to lend him some money. She set her glass aside and, without a hint of emotion, asked how much he needed. After a brief pause of hesitation, he responded softly that he needed 3 million won. She stared at him, stunned, and exclaimed how absurd it was. She asks, "Do you really need that much money?" Chanoke lowered his gaze, apologizing earnestly and assuring her that he didn't mean to make her uncomfortable. He promised to pay her back as soon as possible and begged her to help him just this once. But her tone turned sarcastic as she questioned his ability to repay her. Even if he had been adopted, she reminded him, he had once been called the son of a man who was regarded as a king. Yet now here he was, crawling to her for help. Not for 300 million or even 30 million, but just 3 million won. She scoffed at his audacity and added that the only reason she hadn't caused a scene was because her husband wasn't home. Otherwise, it would have been quite the spectacle. Leaning closer to him, she whispered that his late father would have been proud to witness such a fall from grace. She reminded him that it was precisely because of his current, pathetic state that the woman who used to be his wife was now doing cardio workouts with other men. Her words struck him deeply, and he felt overwhelmed with shame and insult. Trying to maintain some composure, he responded that he was sorry, admitting that the last comment was a bit too much. He confessed that he had his own burdens lately and had been feeling increasingly sensitive. She sighed and advised him to clear his head, mentioning that she needed to go to her room for a bit. As she walked away, he turned his eyes to the family photo hanging on the wall. It was a picture of his brother, his sister-in-law, and their daughter. Just then, she suddenly reappeared behind him and asked whether he thought her daughter was pretty. He replied sincerely that she had indeed grown a lot since the last time he had seen her. She laughed and remarked how thankful she was that her daughter didn't resemble her father at all. They both chuckled at that, and in the next moment, she handed him a bundle of cash, 3 million won. He looked down at it with a wave of gratitude, expressing his sincere thanks. However, her eyes narrowed with a teasing glint, and she added that if he agreed to do a little cardio training with her today, she might give him a bit more on top of that. His face turned pale with nervousness, and he hesitantly asked her what she meant by that. She calmly replied that it had been a long time since either of them had been alone. She confessed that she couldn't even recall the last time the man who was supposed to be her husband had come home. Still looking alarmed, he tried to dismiss her words and asked what she was talking about. She stared back at him and reminded him of what she had said earlier. They were both in the same situation. She proposed they take revenge. She would get back at her husband, and he could get revenge on his ex-wife. She assured him there was no need to pretend or hide anything, as she already knew he hadn't been with anyone since his divorce. She could sense the desire he had been suppressing for so long and offered to release it all, suggesting that they could make a perfect partnership in the so-called wrestling. He looked more and more uncomfortable, repeating that they shouldn't be doing this. But she leaned in and asked what the problem really was. If they were honest, she pointed out he and her husband weren't even blood relatives. Not a single drop connected them. Everything would be fine as long as they didn't get caught. She smiled and said softly that it would be their little secret. Then, with a suggestive tone, she asked, "Shall they start now?" After completing his conversation with his sister-in-law, Chanoke went to a bank ATM to carry out a transaction. While checking his account balance, he was stunned to see the amount deposited. Without wasting time, he immediately called his sister-in-law and mentioned in disbelief that he had only requested 3 million won, but had received 10 million won instead. On the other end, she calmly replied that she had sent the money and jokingly referred to it as alimony for the little secret they shared that day. Confused and caught off guard, he questioned the term alimony, but before he could say more, she abruptly hung up after saying, "Yes, you're done by." He tried to continue, insisting he wasn't finished talking, but the call had already ended. As he stood there with his phone in hand, he began to wonder if this was meant to be compensation. A deep sense of worry clouded his face, and his thoughts grew conflicted. He recalled her earlier words, how she had said she didn't think he was the type of little brother who would disagree. She had teasingly added that she never expected him to have such a cute side, and suggested that he must have imagined a wrestling scenario with his older brother's wife. Embarrassed, he had told her that he wasn't the kind of person she thought he was, but she had laughed and responded that his face suggested otherwise. She had then warned that continuing in that way wasn't good for his body and told him to stop. She had tried to encourage him by inviting him to join her training session, calling him brother-in-law and urging him to try it with her, but he apologized and declined. When she inquired about his actions, he had told her that no matter how hard he tried, he didn't think he could go through the session with her. He had resolved to find another way to come up with the money. With a firm tone, he had asked her to pretend that he had never come that day, then quietly said goodbye and walked away. She had silently watched him leave, her thoughts lingering on how Chanoke remained the same innocent man who still didn't understand the gravity of his situation. She reflected that he was truly in a miserable state and wondered if he believed he had made the right choice. Yet, despite everything, she had softly said she would wait for him, because deep down, she knew he would return eventually. Back in the present, Chanoke was on the phone with his son. He told him that he had just sent the money and advised him to use it sparingly this time. He inquired when his son would be coming home and reminded him to stay in touch if he had any plans. After ending the call, he stood silently, lost in thought, the earlier incident with his sister-in-law replaying in his mind. Her voice echoed in his memory, stating that it had been a while and that she could give him more. As the flashbacks faded, He tried to shake off the thoughts, murmuring to himself that it had been a brief mistake. But before he could dwell further, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name Shin Ji, and he paused, reflecting on who was calling. Upon answering, he greeted her and noted how it had been a while. She responded cheerfully, saying that she had been doing well, all thanks to him. She laughed warmly, and he returned her smile, asking what prompted the call, if something had happened. She reassured him that nothing was wrong and asked if he was free that evening, as she wanted to invite him to dinner. He told her that he was available, to which she happily replied that it was good to hear. She mentioned that she had received a generous bonus this time and explained that she wanted to treat him to dinner. He chuckled and called her a silly girl, telling her that it was all right and she didn't need to do that, especially since she probably needed the money more. But she insisted. She told him that it was the least she could do, given everything she had received from him. She had nothing else to offer, and treating him to dinner was the only thing within her means to express gratitude. She asked if he could at least allow her that small gesture in return for what he had done for her. Later, Chanoke arrived at Chong. As he took in his surroundings, he reflected on how much had changed since the last time he had been there. Everything felt different. The ambiance, the air, even the vibe had shifted. Just then, a familiar voice called out from behind. It was Shin Ji, waving at him cheerfully as she approached. He looked at her and wondered why she had chosen to dress in such a manner. He questioned if she was truly embracing her femininity now. She looked radiant, full of youthful energy, and as she walked toward him, he found himself thinking about how wonderful it must feel to be that young. His gaze briefly drifted to the scar on her leg, and his memory took him back to the moment she had been stabbed there, a moment filled with blood and chaos. Returning to the present, she asked him playfully if he had been thinking of something exciting about her. He quickly denied it, saying that his mind was just full of random thoughts. She pressed him further, wanting to know what exactly he had been thinking, but he brushed it off again. She pointed out that his eyes were telling a different story, and her words annoyed him. He threatened to leave, but she playfully declared that she wouldn't let him and burst into laughter. She wrapped her arm around his, and he questioned what kind of woman would casually hook her arm around someone like that. She replied that she simply felt like it. He looked at her in disbelief, asking what he was supposed to do with her, how she could feel comfortable hugging someone in his 40s. She replied sweetly that she would only do that with a mister who took good care of her. He looked at her again and sighed, urging her that they should get going, or else they would be late. She agreed, and the two of them began walking together toward the hotel where their dinner reservation had been made. As they made their way to the restaurant, their conversation flowed naturally. He asked her if her leg had fully recovered, and she confirmed that it was, even saying she could run without any issue now, all thanks to him. He expressed relief, but remarked that it was a shame nothing could be done about the scar. She simply smiled and said that it would fade with time, and then burst into laughter again. He acknowledged with a faint nod that it was truly good to see her cheerful again after every. Her eyes lit up as she responded, saying that she felt the same. She genuinely liked the version of herself that she had become lately. There was a shy gleam in her expression as she admitted that this moment almost felt like she was out on a date with her boyfriend. Not expecting such a remark, he turned toward her with a confused look and instinctively attempted to pull his arm away, trying to maintain some distance. But she quickly laughed it off, her voice playful and teasing, assuring him that she was only joking. Despite the awkward moment, the atmosphere between them didn't sour. Soon, the two arrived in front of a grand hotel. She motioned toward the entrance and casually informed him that everything had already been arranged. Reservations were made, and there was no room for second thoughts now. Her voice carried a calm confidence, reassuring him not to worry as she would handle everything from here on. As he stood still and stared at the hotel's lavish structure, a sense of discomfort crept over him. The place looked extravagant, clearly far beyond what he was accustomed to. It reeked of wealth and high society, and he found himself wondering how much it must have cost. Before he could dwell on it too long, she told him she would go in first to check where their table had been reserved. She instructed him to wait outside and not to wander off. He nodded, muttered a quiet okay, and watched her disappear through the glass doors. Alone again, he leaned against a pillar and let his thoughts spiral. He couldn't help but feel like a complete failure. Even though he had been invited, the fact that he was being treated to a meal by a much younger woman, A woman about the same age as his daughter, no less, left a bitter taste in his mouth. Worse still was the realization that he hadn't even treated his own daughter properly. He questioned what kind of man he had become. He glanced around at the opulent surroundings, the perfectly clean sidewalks, the gleaming surfaces, the luxury boutiques, and the polished vehicles. The atmosphere suffocated him. He hated how out of place he felt in these affluent neighborhoods. He told himself that this wasn't his world. He didn't belong here. People around him strolled confidently, clad in designer clothes, carrying expensive handbags, and chatting in polished voices. Foreign luxury cars rolled by as if they were the standard, not the exception. He stared at one of them and thought bitterly that anyone riding in such a vehicle must be from a different league altogether. And then, as if fate decided to play another cruel joke, a luxurious car pulled up nearby. A man stepped out, dressed in an elegant suit, his every movement exuding power and confidence. The man looked to be around the same age as him. At first, he thought nothing of it until he got a proper look at the man's face. His heart froze. He blinked in disbelief. Then again, he recognized his older brother. For a moment, he was overcome with a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. He wondered why his brother was here. Then came a contradictory wave of relief. He considered that it might be a good thing. If he had lingered with the woman who invited him any longer, the situation might have escalated in the wrong direction. But soon his curiosity took over, and his eyes scanned for whoever was accompanying his brother. He wondered who the woman with him was. At first glance, he thought it might be his sister-in-law. But as he looked more carefully, he realized this woman was someone else entirely. Whoever she wasn't the woman married to his brother. Then he noticed something else. His older brother was smiling. He found it strange, as his brother wasn't the kind to smile easily or warmly, not unless he was with someone special. He wondered if she was perhaps a business associate or a companion for some formal gathering. Yet something about the scene didn't sit right. He watched them with intense curiosity, trying to piece things together. The woman looked oddly familiar, though he couldn't place her face immediately. As he stared, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind him. Shin Ji had come to fetch him, calling out that he could come in now. She urged him to hurry up, but he didn't react. He was too absorbed in the sight before him. She called out again, her voice slightly louder and tinged with confusion, wondering why he wasn't responding. His face had turned pale, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and repulsion. He couldn't take his eyes off the woman. Jehui followed his gaze and turned her attention to the couple he had been watching. Her reaction was immediate. She gasped and mumbled in disbelief. She recognized the woman instantly as her aunt. Her mind raced as she tried to understand what she was seeing. She noted that her aunt, now divorced, was technically free to do as she pleased, but she questioned why it had to be today and why here. Her embarrassment surfaced instantly, and she tried to brush it off with a nervous laugh. She joked about how unexpected it was to see her aunt here, and then encouraged him to come up, saying their table was waiting. But Chanoke wasn't listening anymore. He had finally recognized the woman as his ex-wife. Time seemed to slow. His thoughts collapsed into chaos. He questioned if this could truly be real. He marveled at the improbability of the encounter and wondered why it was happening now. He felt as if fate was mocking him. Memories of her flooded back. Their conversations, arguments, the life they once shared. And now here she was, standing beside his older brother, smiling, laughing, and at ease. He felt an urge to scream. He wondered how she could smile like that in front of his own brother. He questioned if she was pretending or if this was some kind of illusion. His mind rejected reality, even as his eyes confirmed it. Jaewi stood beside him, equally shaken. Her face mirrored his discomfort, disturbed, embarrassed, unsure. Just then, as if the sky itself had taken pity on their state, it began to rain. Chanoke turned to her and spoke softly. He apologized, noting that the rain didn't look like it would stop anytime soon, and suggested it was best they canceled dinner for tonight. She nodded quietly and told him that she understood. She said he should head home and take care of himself. He agreed, saying they could meet again another time. She watched him leave, standing there alone in the rain, her expression a blend of embarrassment and helplessness. As Chanoke walked away, his mind felt like it would explode from the weight of what he had just seen. His ex-wife, smiling, next to his brother. He replayed the image in his head again and again, still unable to believe it. Rage simmered inside him, mixed with regret. A part of him wanted to turn back, confront them both, and demand answers, but he questioned what that would solve. Deep down, he knew this situation hadn't happened overnight. It had started long ago, with his own failures. He wondered if things would have been different, if he had been better, worked harder, or tried to keep their family together. His thoughts wandered again to his sister-in-law and her recent words. She had told him that facing the truth, no matter how painful, might ease the burden in his heart. She had said living in denial only made things worse. Her voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that she had tried to knock some sense into him. She had told him he looked too sullen lately, like someone stuck in the same rut forever. She had also admitted to struggling, saying she had her own problems and sensitivities. She had mocked him, stating it was no surprise his ex-wife had moved on, going to gyms and doing workouts with other men while he just stood still. She had vowed that both of them would get revenge, her on her cheating husband and him on his ex-wife. Now, walking through the rain, Chanoke realized something. She had been right, and in that moment, soaked and disillusioned, he made up his mind. He was going to see his sister-in-law. He went to his sister-in-law's house, and as soon as she opened the door, she looked at him in surprise and remarked with a teasing tone, "Look who's here." Her eyes quickly scanned his drenched appearance, rainwater dripping from his clothes, and she asked him why he was completely soaked. In response, he told her that perhaps the rain had simply been unavoidable. She gave him a curious look and questioned why he was acting so strangely, referring to him in a playful manner as her brother-in-law. However, he didn't directly address her question. Instead, he muttered something cryptic about revenge, implying that what he had in mind was a kind of payback that would be fitting for those involved. After entering the house, he quietly shut the door behind him and turned the lock. Facing his sister-in-law, he told her that he wanted to have a wrestling session right there in the house. However, she couldn't immediately grasp what he meant and asked him to wait a moment. Confused, she asked why he was suddenly behaving this way, wondering aloud whether the once obedient man had now transformed into a wolf. Looking at him closely, she questioned him further, accusing him of spending all the money she had given him in less than half a day. But he wasn't interested in that topic. Instead, he admitted that he had seen Minyong and his brother together. That sight had etched itself deep into his mind, replaying over and over like a broken memory. It was that very scene that had unsettled him so deep. He tried to explain everything to his sister-in-law, telling her that after witnessing the two of them together, many things had become clearer to him, especially her words and actions from earlier. The things she had said about seeking revenge had taken on a new meaning. So, setting aside his pride, he asked her again, without any shame, if the proposal she had made to him earlier was still valid. She stared at him with a mix of sarcasm and disbelief, asking whether he even knew what shame meant. Her words dripped with irony as she reminded him how he had shown up out of nowhere, asked her for money, and then had the nerve to reject her offer cold. And now, only half a day later, he had the audacity to return and ask whether her proposal was still on the table. She scoffed, telling him that he had to be joking. She demanded to know what exactly he had realized and whether he had finally grown tired of lying to himself. With a biting tone, she asked what he planned to do next. Then, her expression shifted as she suggested they pick up from where they had left off, that intense moment they shared. She proposed they continue with a cardio session, just the two of them. She admitted that she actually appreciated the fact that he had come to find her after seeing the truth with his own eyes. Because of that, she was willing to give him another chance, but only with one condition. The humiliation he had made her endure earlier would now be repaid with interest. She told him it had been a while since she had felt this way, so as her brother-in-law, he would now have to work hard to train her through the cardio session. If he managed to do that properly, then maybe, just maybe, she would consider allowing him to train with her again in the future. And so the two of them began their intense cardio and workout session inside the house. While they were training, he commented that he hadn't even done much yet, and she already seemed to be struggling. But she quickly countered his remark with sarcasm, questioning whether he really thought she would be satisfied with such mild training. She brought up the earlier rejection and the humiliation she felt because of him, making it clear that this light workout wouldn't be nearly enough to make up for it. Um, Looking embarrassed, he quietly admitted that he understood her point. Still, she firmly stated that no matter what happened, she wasn't going to take responsibility for anything that might follow. She demanded that he promise her that much, but instead of directly agreeing, He remarked that he had never imagined she could act with such arrogance. Then, with a hint of bitterness, she questioned why someone who behaved like this had still failed to please his ex-wife. During the intense gaming session that followed, she was also having her own thoughts. She realized that if they kept going like this, she might not be able to hold back. Compared to the man who had treated her harshly and couldn't even handle his own impulses, the situation now felt entirely different. Minyong had just finished showering in the hotel room when she stepped out of the bathroom and was startled to find Chaniel pacing and yelling into his phone. He appeared agitated, his voice sharp and commanding. He was on a call with someone, shouting at him in frustration. Chaniel demanded to know why the report had only just been made, accusing the other person of having a death wish and pressing him for details. He insisted on knowing exactly when the boy had arrived, emphasizing that he needed the information urgently. Minyong stood behind him, slightly confused and concerned, quietly calling his name, Chaniel. But he didn't acknowledge her presence. His focus remained fixed on the call, as he continued giving strict instructions, telling the person on the other end that he was on his way and warning them not to let the boy out of their sight. He continued hurling curses through the phone, his tone growing darker. Still puzzled, Minyong asked him why he looked so troubled and if something serious had happened. But Chaniel brushed off her concern, telling her that he needed to leave immediately. His voice was cold and distant as he told her to amuse herself and that he'd call her later. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Chanoke was fully engaged in an intense workout session with his sister-in-law. The session had become increasingly intense, and she was beginning to feel overwhelmed. The sound of heavy rain outside the house only added to the atmosphere, soaking the silence with a persistent drumming on the windows. Once the workout session ended, she turned toward him, her voice holding a trace of concern, and asked whether he was leaving already. The rain was pouring hard outside, and she gently suggested that he stay the night instead of heading out into the storm. But he responded with polite firmness, explaining that he had work the next day and believed it would be better to go home now. She sighed softly and replied that it was a pity. She had hoped he might consider staying over. She then added that if he ever did, they could talk more constructively next time. He nodded with a small smile, agreeing that such a conversation would be good when the right moment arrived. With that, he began to take his leave. Before he stepped outside, she handed him an umbrella, her expression still unreadable. He thanked her and said he would be heading home now, asking her to take care. Her eyes held a deeper emotion as she softly reminded him not to forget the mixed feelings he had experienced that day. The very emotions, she said, that he had unknowingly stirred within her. He paused for a brief second, looking into her eyes, and told her that he wouldn't forget. Then, without another word, he stepped out of the house and into the downpour. As he made his way through the rain, his mind remained a whirlwind of thoughts. He found himself committing again to what had happened, whispering to himself, as if trying to interpret an unspoken message from her. His thoughts swirled around the entire workout session and the strange emotional energy that lingered afterward. But his mind soon drifted further, back into a painful past. He couldn't help but recall that moment when he had once seen Minyong with Chaniel, an image that continued to haunt him. Still walking through the storm, his head throbbed with a growing ache. He muttered that he needed to rest, hoping that reaching home would give him a moment of peace. But when he finally arrived, something immediately felt off. He froze upon noticing that the front door was slightly ajar. Outside the entrance, a pair of unfamiliar shoes caught his attention, women's heels. A strange unease crept through him as he questioned who could be there at this hour. He cautiously stepped inside, his heart pounding, and the sight that met his eyes left him utterly shocked. Standing there, as if untouched by the time that had passed between them, was his ex-wife Minyong. For a moment, he stood completely still, unable to believe what he was seeing. His voice faltered as he asked her why she was there. But she didn't answer his question directly. Instead, she glanced at the rain outside and asked where he had just come from, addressing him as husband, a title that no longer belonged to their present, yet somehow still lingered in her tone. He stood there, utterly shocked and unable to believe what had just happened. He questioned her, asking how she could have come inside like that and walked in without permission. Minyong calmly explained that he had not changed his passcode, so she wondered why she was suddenly not allowed to enter. He looked at her with a mixture of confusion and exhaustion, telling her that he didn't know what she was up to, and since it was late, she should just go home. She returned his gaze steadily, remarking that he had changed. He no longer even looked her in the eyes. She asked if his feelings for her had already disappeared completely, or if perhaps there was another woman in his life now. He raised his voice in shock, demanding what she was saying and what she meant by such accusation. She quickly reassured him that she had only been teasing, questioning why he was so frustrated. Apologizing, she said she didn't mean to upset or anger him, but she had missed him. That was why she had come. She spoke about how much they had suffered over time and how difficult it was to be entirely alone even though they were separated. Before, he had always been by her side, supporting her no matter what, but now, without anyone else, she felt miserable and lonely. He pleaded with Minyong not to act like that, reminding her that their relationship was already over and that if she kept behaving this way, it would only make things more uncomfortable for both of them. He confessed that he was too tired that day and begged her to stop, urging her to go back home. She remained standing there, stunned and silent. After a moment, he said he would leave and told her to do whatever she wanted. Refusing to let him go so easily, she grabbed him by the arm, calling him Chanoke and asking why he had become so cold and distant. She reminded him of the kindness he always showed her, regardless of who she was. She pleaded with him not to say that things weren't right between them, pointing out that they had two healthy children together and that he was still the only one she had in her life. He didn't respond at first, but then, unexpectedly, he wrapped his arms around her and apologized. He admitted that he had been emotional lately and confessed that he had missed her very much as well. He thanked her for coming to see him and said how much he truly wanted to see her. At that moment, his thoughts drifted to Yunhui's earlier words, reminding him that they were in the same difficult situation and that even though he already understood this, he had to be careful about every action he took moving forward. Yunhui had warned him to act normally and keep things as if nothing had happened, because if the other party found out, it would mean disaster for both of them. He knew he had to pretend ignorance, while Minyong had to appear as though nothing was wrong. That night, Chanoke and Minyong finished their yoga session together. The next morning, Chanoke was lying on his bed when he checked his phone and noticed multiple missed calls from his sister-in-law. He immediately tried to call her back, but the operator informed him that her phone was switched off and asked him to try again later. He wondered why she would turn off her phone like that. Unable to shake the unease growing in his chest, Chanoke stepped outside his house, his mind racing with thoughts. He told himself it couldn't be happening, that something must be wrong. Suddenly, his phone rang again. It was his sister-in-law. She apologized profusely for oversleeping and missing his calls, asking if he was there. Before he could respond properly, Chanoke was abruptly attacked from behind. His mind went blank as he struggled to understand what was happening. He found himself in a dusty, dark place, his head covered with something so he could see nothing. When he finally regained consciousness, he realized he was tied up with ropes and surrounded by several men inside what looked like a warehouse. To his shock, he also spotted his sister-in-law there, restrained and in miserable condition, clearly under the control of the same group of men. Beside her stood Chaniel, who was verbally abusing and insulting her. He sarcastically asked if she had eaten something nice lately because her throat seemed to have healed. He asked how long this had been going on, adding that it had been quite a while. Then, turning toward Chanoke, Chaniel smirked with a dark, mocking expression on his face. Chanoke demanded an explanation from Yunhui, his voice tight with disbelief and desperation. His heart was pounding, and he couldn't comprehend the scene unfolding before him. Yunhui stood frozen in place, her face pale and drenched in guilt. She looked utterly devastated, barely able to meet his gaze. Trembling, she apologized, her voice breaking as she told him how sorry she was that he had been caught up in all of this, how none of it was supposed to involve him, yet somehow, because of her, he had been dragged into the chaos. Before either of them could say another word, Chaniel stormed forward, his face twisted with rage. His voice thundered through the warehouse as he lashed out at Yunhui. He accused her of shamelessness, demanding to know if she had a death wish, asking how she dared to speak so openly to Chanoke right in front of him. His words were laced with venom as he mocked her. Was the experience that enjoyable that just one night of affection, all it took for her to be swept away by another man? Without warning, Chaniel's fury became physical. He began striking Yunhui repeatedly, his anger blinding him to her cries. She begged him to stop, her voice shrill with pain and fear, but he ignored her pleas. Chanoke could no longer stand to watch. His voice broke through the violence as he shouted for Chaniel to stop. Desperation consumed him as he claimed all the blame and begged Chaniel to kill him instead. He couldn't bear to witness Yunhui being beaten any longer. Chaniel turned his attention to him, his eyes gleaming with cold malice. With a contemptuous tone, he said that it was not for Chanoke to decide who would live or die. Only he had that power. Then he spat out his disgust, stating that he couldn't believe his own younger brother had betrayed him. He admitted that he had suspected someone was having secret training sessions with his wife, but never in his wildest dreams had he thought it would be his own flesh and blood. The disbelief in his voice turned bitter. He questioned Chanoke's sense, asking how he could possibly agree to such a thing. Even if they weren't related by blood, they were still brothers. That bond meant something, or at least it should have. And even if that woman had asked for training with him, so why did he have to cross the line? Chaniel's voice grew louder as he accused them all of forgetting the kindness and opportunities they had received. In his mind, none of them deserved forgiveness. Chano couldn't remain silent. He raised his voice and shouted back, pointing out Chaniel's own hypocrisy. He reminded him that he too had been secretly meeting with Minyong under the pretense of training. Chaniel smirked in response, as if amused by the accusation. With mock innocence, he asked if what Chanoke had done was all just an elaborate revenge plot. Chanoke's voice cracked with fury as he demanded to know if Chaniel felt no shame toward their father, the man who now rested in heaven. But Chaniel dismissed the idea with cruelty, calling their late father a useless old man who couldn't even walk properly before he died. He told Chanoke never to mention him again. Then, with unsettling pride, he declared himself an angel, mocking the very idea of morality. Chaniel continued, claiming that he had taken excellent care of Chanoke's ex-wife. The words stabbed at Chanoke like knives, his frustration mounting as he tried to comprehend the extent of Chaniel's depravity. But before he could say more, Chaniel kicked him backward with force and told him to calm down. He reminded him that he was still his younger brother, and that alone was the only reason he wasn't being killed on the spot. He warned him to stop yelling if he wished to live. He then coldly reminded Chanoke that since the divorce, he was no longer part of the family. Whatever training or yoga sessions Chaniel had with Minyong were none of his concern anymore. With a sneer, he called him ridiculous, laughable even. Chanoke swallowed his pain and tried one last time to explain. He admitted that while he understood Chaniel's anger toward his ex-wife, there was a clear misunderstanding happening. But Chaniel wasn't interested in explanations. With a twisted grin, Chaniel confessed that he had done yoga sessions with Minyong and justified it by saying she had come to him willingly, and he merely obliged her request. He laughed cruelly and said that he didn't care whether Chanoke believed it or not. The truth was out, and that was all that mattered. With that, he announced he had to leave. Before walking away, Chaniel gave orders to his men, instructing them not to beat Chanoke too badly. He still wanted to be able to see his niece and nephew, after all. The men nodded and agreed, replying respectfully, "Yes, Chairman, we will do as you say." Chaniel glanced back one last time and declared with mock satisfaction that working out with Minyong was truly a blessing. As soon as he left the warehouse, his men carried out his command. They beat Chanoke severely. By midnight, they threw his bloodied, unconscious body into a car and dumped him on a deserted road. One of them crouched beside his broken form and offered a final warning. He said that he was only being spared because he was the chairman's younger brother. If he wanted to keep living, he needed to watch his actions and stay out of trouble. Otherwise, things wouldn't end so kindly next time. With that, they drove away, leaving him broken and bleeding in the silence of the night. Lying there, battered and barely conscious, Chanoke sank into deep reflection. His body ached, but the turmoil in his mind was even more unbearable. All his life, he had lived according to a strict moral code. Morality wasn't just a concept to him, it was his very essence, the foundation of his being. He had vowed never to become like the immoral parents who had abandoned him. He prided himself on being righteous, lawful, and orderly. These obsessions had drawn boundaries in his life, lines he had promised never to cross. When others crossed those lines, he scolded them silently, confident in his own virtue. But now, lying alone and defeated, he questioned everything. He wondered how far could one really go with such rigid ideals and thinking about morality, if not just another form of pride, an illusion he had clung to all along. The next morning, he opened his eyes slowly and found himself lying on a hospital bed. Confusion washed over him. He tried to sit up but winced from the pain. Memories swirled in his head, and he thought it was a hospital bed, and who had brought him. His memory felt fragmented. Then, through his blurry vision, he saw a familiar figure standing by his side. It was Shin Ji, watching him quietly. She looked relieved to see him awake. With gentle concern in her voice, she greeted him and asked how he was feeling now. Still weak and disoriented, he looked at her and, struggling to speak, asked how she had ended up there beside him. Chanoke and Shinjehui were sitting quietly in the hospital's lawn area, like the calm surroundings contrasting with the emotions quietly brewing between them. It was during this stillness that Chanoke finally voiced something he had only recently come to realize. He recalled the day he had lost consciousness after being thrown down, how a stranger had seen him lying helplessly on the ground and muttered something like, "Poor man, what he has done to brought him." That one passing soul had taken the time to report the incident, which led the hospital staff to search through his contacts, trying to reach someone who could help. But most of the people saved in his phone had ignored the calls. They hadn't even bothered to answer. Only one person had responded, and that person was sitting beside him now, Shin Ji. With a soft laugh, she remarked that it was almost amusing. When he asked what she meant, she said that sitting beside him like this brought back memories of the past. It reminded her of the time when they were both students and how everything seemed uncertain and raw. He agreed with a faint smile, noting how quickly the years had gone by. It felt like just yesterday, and yet they had aged, changed, and lost so many things along the way. She added, half jokingly, that back then she had been a young and reckless student. But now it was him lying in a hospital bed, and she couldn't help but laugh, though her voice carried an edge of sadness. With a quiet breath, he began to explain. He told her that over time, he had distanced himself from his relatives, friends, and even acquaintances. Everyone he once cared for, he had slowly pushed away. He had held all of them close to his heart at one point, hoping to be seen as a respectable husband, a proud father, and a loyal friend. That's all he had ever wanted, to live a life filled with quiet dignity. But despite those intentions, life hadn't rewarded him with peace or happiness. In the end, he found himself alone, abandoned by the very people he once loved. There was nothing left by his side, and in this solitude, he confessed, he felt utterly pathetic. She looked at him intently, her gaze unwavering, and asked if she had been included in the list of people he had chosen to distance himself from. She told him that she wondered what she meant to him. She told him that whenever she looked at him now, he reminded her of someone who had been left behind by the world, someone who had lost hope and had been swallowed by sorrow. She said it was heartbreaking to witness, and that was why she couldn't bring herself to walk away from him. She wanted to be near him. Meanwhile, during all this, Juhi secretly stretches her leg under the table and starts teasing Gitai with subtle movements. Yuna, caught up in her irritation, fails to notice what's going on beneath the table. Gitai tries to remain composed and endure it. She asked, the longer it goes on, the more. Her voice trembled slightly, as she admitted that perhaps it sounded like the foolish rambling of a young girl. But she wanted him to know the truth. She really liked him. She told him he needed to stop looking back at the people who had left him. They were no longer worth his pain. Instead, he should look at her, because she was still here. She promised to stand by him, to support him, to stay until he could learn to smile again and find happiness. A few months later, Chanmin-jae was staring at his phone as it rang with an incoming call from his mother. He looked at the screen with a mixture of bitterness and frustration, his thoughts turning resentful. He couldn't help but think to himself, this is the same mother who ruined everything and doesn't know what she wants now. When he picked up, her voice came through, asking him about his father. Min-jae responded curtly, questioning why she was even bringing his father up. He told her he didn't know anything and that she should stop bothering him. He said he was busy, and her call was annoying. Without waiting for her to respond, he ended the call abruptly. As he lowered the phone, he muttered under his breath, confused by what the call had even meant. He couldn't understand her behavior anymore. Ever since the divorce, she had become more persistent, more irritating. He wondered that if people chose to divorce, then they shouldn't keep interfering in each other's lives, and thought there could be the point of ending a marriage if they were going to continue acting like this. Sitting beside him was his close friend, Hanjin, the only daughter of Chaniel. She noticed the frustration on his face and casually remarked that since his mother had called out of the blue, something might have happened. And with that, the two of them turned their attention to their shared interest and began their usual gaming session. their earlier tension dissolving into the comfort of distraction. After completing her cardio session, Hanjin left the hotel and returned home, her limbs aching from the intense workout. As soon as she opened the door, a strange scent hit her nose, sharp, lingering, and unmistakably unpleasant. She paused at the entrance, her expression hardening as she sniffed again. It was the stale, pungent stench of cigarette smoke. The realization unsettled her. Cigarettes had no place in this house, not any. With a frown forming on her face, she cautiously stepped inside, her nostrils burning slightly as the scent grew stronger the closer she moved toward the living area. As she turned the corner into the living room, her eyes landed on a man who had no business being there. Her father. He sat comfortably on the couch, legs crossed, as if he had been living there all along. Looking up casually, he addressed her with a patronizing smile, referring to her as our princess and asking how she had been. His tone was riddled with sarcasm, as if they had seen each other just yesterday. Without missing a beat, he commented on how late she had been returning home these days and playfully suggested whether she had a man in her life. According to him, everyone ought to meet someone eventually. It was simply part of living. But then, with a shift in tone, he made a snide remark about how she should avoid mingling with people beneath her status because lowly individuals tended to imitate those above them. Hyunjin's jaw clenched in fury. The audacity of the man to act like he had any parental right over her infuriated her. After all the years he had stayed away, years spent hiding, abandoning, and doing everything except being a father, he now had the nerve to waltz back in and play the concerned parent. She could hardly contain the frustration rising in her chest as she snapped back, asking him how he could pretend to care after never once showing his face when they had needed him the most. His presence felt repulsive. She told him as much and asked him not to fake concern, as it made her skin crawl. He tried defending himself with a calm voice, stating that it was only natural for a father to worry about his daughter. But Hyunjin would have none of it. Her tone turned biting as she sarcastically acknowledged his so-called concern, claiming that he must have been keeping a close watch on her if he was so informed about her whereabouts. She challenged him further by offering a mocking response, telling him that if it made him feel better, then yes, she had been dating someone for the past few days. She said maybe he'd like to meet the guy if he wanted to satisfy his sudden curiosity. Then, abruptly, she switched to a more serious tone. She told him to leave her mother alone, just for today, if not for good. Her voice trembled with emotion as she reminded him that their mother was getting older and was recovering slowly from all the trauma. She accused him of physically abusing her mother for weeks, of taking advantage of her fragility. And now, if he was truly here to force Hanjin to meet her stepmother too, then he would only succeed over her dead body. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, Chaniel was on a phone call with one of his workers. He asked if everything had been checked and verified. The worker confirmed that they had indeed looked into everything, but something about the situation still felt off. Something just didn't add up. Chaniel asked for clarification, urging the worker to explain what was going on. The worker laid out all the inconsistencies and then asked what they were supposed to do next. After taking a moment to process the details, Chaniel concluded that there was no question. They had to invite the mysterious party they had been investigating. The worker hesitated slightly, pointing out that they still didn't know who these people actually were. Chaniel, however, remained firm, saying that all uncertainties would vanish the moment they met face to face. The worker acknowledged his directive and agreed to pass the message along. As he ended the call, he found himself wondering what kind of woman would have the power and money to draw this much attention. Still, he reminded himself that it didn't really matter. He would judge for himself once he saw her. He was particularly curious about this woman named Shin Ji and what she might bring to the table. That evening, Chaniel hosted a grand dinner party attended by several colleagues and high-ranking business partners. The atmosphere buzzed with polite laughter and clinking glasses. Chaniel stood at the head of the room and asked his guests if they were enjoying themselves. One of the managers approached and reported that everything was going smoothly, except for one detail. Miss Shin Ji had not yet arrived. She had promised over the phone that she would attend without fail. A seat had been reserved in her name, but now they couldn't reach her. Chaniel told the manager not to worry and to set that aside for now. He mused that perhaps it was better this way, given the uncertainty surrounding her identity. He admitted he had been debating how to handle things if it turned out the investor was indeed a woman. Then, he asked whether everything else was ready. The manager assured him that all preparations were complete. Chaniel nodded and declared that they shouldn't keep their guests waiting any longer. The manager, looking slightly confused, asked what Chaniel meant. Chaniel elaborated, saying that everyone in the room knew this was more than just a dinner party. There was no need to circle around the truth anymore. With that, he moved toward the table where the shareholders were seated, speaking in a warm and confident tone. He began by apologizing for the delay and asked if the meal had been satisfactory. The shareholders responded with enthusiastic praise, saying that nothing he prepared could ever be disappointing. They even expressed guilt for starting without him. Chaniel chuckled and waved off their concerns, admitting that he had been the one who was late and thanking them sincerely for their patience. He then announced that he had brought something that might aid their digestion, something a little special. He admitted he didn't know their individual preferences just yet, but had chosen the items carefully and hoped they would accept them with an open heart. He thanked them for the unwavering trust and loyalty they had shown him over the years, and expressed his desire to continue building on their successes. The shareholders responded with enthusiasm, praising his leadership and assuring him of their continued loyalty. One even joked that with his charisma, he could probably run for Congress. Chaniel laughed heartily at the remark, clearly pleased. Just then, the manager returned and said that Miss Shin Ji had arrived. But before he could finish, Chaniel interrupted, raising his voice in disbelief. He reminded the manager that they had agreed to forget the issue for now, especially since she hadn't even contacted them. The manager apologized profusely and explained that he had left her a message, although there had been no reply. Instead, a man had arrived claiming to be her representative. They had received confirmation from Miss Shin Ji herself that he was indeed authorized to speak on her behalf. Chaniel looked stunned and repeated the word man in disbelief. The manager nodded, confirming that the representative had introduced himself formally and that Miss Shin Ji had verified everything just moments ago. Chaniel scoffed and muttered under his breath that the woman must be foolish to send a man in her place. Still, he adjusted his expression and turned back to the shareholders with a composed face. He announced that he had even more exciting news to share, more thrilling than the gifts themselves. He reminded them that someone had recently made a significant investment in their company, Miss Shin Ji. She had planned to attend the gathering, but due to unforeseen circumstances had sent a representative instead. Chaniel gestured toward the entrance and invited everyone to join him in welcoming this individual, asking for a round of applause. Just as the applause began, a voice interrupted from the back. Calm and composed, the man walked in and stated that the formalities were unnecessary. He said that they already trusted the chairman enough. Then, with steady confidence, he introduced himself simply as Chanoke. He announced that he had even more exciting news to share, more thrilling than the gifts themselves. He reminded them that someone had recently made a significant investment in their company, Miss Shin Ji. She had planned to attend the gathering, but due to unforeseen circumstances had sent a representative instead. Chaniel gestured toward the entrance and invited everyone to join him in welcoming this individual, asking for a round of applause. Just as the applause began, a voice interrupted from the back. Calm and composed, the man walked in and stated that the formalities were unnecessary. He said that they already trusted the chairman enough. Then, with steady confidence, he introduced himself simply as Chanoke. All of the shareholders seated in the meeting room had begun whispering among themselves in low, hushed tones. If that were the case, then that man standing before them was none other than Chairman Cha's younger brother. Another shareholder, equally taken aback, asked if Chairman Cha even had a younger brother and expressed disbelief, urging everyone not to jump to conclusions without facts. Yet another present in the room interjected, recalling that the former chairman had once adopted a child many years ago. That realization began to stir memories among the others, who acknowledged that they had indeed heard whispers of such a connection before. Elsewhere, Chaniel stood rooted in place, his face contorting with a mixture of shock and repulsion, as his gaze fixed on the figure of Chano, confidently entering the meeting. His mind reeled, unable to comprehend how such a situation had unfolded so suddenly. The very sight of Chanoke appearing in that sacred corporate space left him stunned and alarmed. Shortly afterward, the two of them ended up inside the president's office. The atmosphere shifted immediately as Chaniel erupted, his voice sharp and furious. He berated Chano, questioning how he had the audacity to show up there as if he belonged. He expressed disbelief that Chanoke hadn't learned his lesson from the last confrontation and asked if he even realized the weight of the place he had stepped into. With vehemence in his voice, he accused him of fearlessly trespassing without a single ounce of shame. Chanoke, however, stood calm and composed. He faced the fury with steady eyes and responded in a measured tone, remarking that he had indeed learned many things, particularly from Chaniel himself, and, oddly enough, found reason to be grateful to him for those bitter lessons. Chaniel scoffed, the corner of his lips twitching into a sarcastic smirk. He challenged Chanoke's supposed enlightenment and asked if he truly understood what sort of place he had entered and what kind of people had gathered there on that day. His words were sharp, condescending, and designed to belittle. Chanoke, still smiling faintly, affirmed that he understood everything quite well. He described the place as one where unpleasant parasites congregated, lured by the sweet promise of power and profit, just like flies drawn to honey. His words were pointed and deliberate. The remark further provoked Chaniel, who could barely contain his anger. He questioned Chanoke's audacity and accused him of losing his mind, especially for arriving so shamelessly, backed by a woman like Shin Ji. Chaniel questioned whether Chanoke had now come to believe himself above everyone else. He expressed his complete inability to comprehend how such a woman could place her trust in someone like him. Chaniel went on to mock Chanoke's sudden rise in confidence. He sarcastically pointed out that although Chanoke may now possess some money, that didn't equate to true capability. His voice dripped with mockery as he laughed bitterly, labeling him a pathetic, middle-aged divorcee, one who was, in his eyes, merely being manipulated by his ex-wife and children. To him, Chanoke's presence in that room was absurd and laughable. Chanoke, refusing to be provoked, quietly replied that Chaniel had always been good at these things, taking what didn't belong to him and wielding authority that wasn't earned. Chaniel took the jab in stride and continued his sarcasm, suggesting that if things were really so cozy, perhaps Chanoke should introduce this mysterious woman to him. He complained about his dissatisfaction with Minyong and claimed he was ready for something new. Despite the continued insults, Chanoke maintained his composure. He clarified without emotion that the woman in question was Shin Ji, no one else. Her identity was clear, and there was no reason to hide it. Chaniel found this even more amusing. He burst into laughter, insisting that Chanoke had lost all sense of reality. He commented on how hilarious and bizarre it was to see him so confident now. His expression twisted further as he went on to belittle him, sneering that Shin Ji's net worth exceeded 2.5 billion won, an amount far beyond the petty 3 million won Chanoke had once begged for at his doorstep. He laughed cruelly and remarked that Chanoke was truly unbelievable. He questioned where he had even found such audacity, but Chanoke only replied that he wasn't surprised by Chaniel's disbelief. He had already anticipated such a reaction. He then pulled out his phone and displayed a confirmation screen which stated that the purchase order had been successfully completed. He told Chaniel that if that wasn't convincing enough, then there was nothing more to discuss. He explained that he now held 300,000 shares representing a 2 to 3% stake in the company. That alone, he said, was enough to justify his presence and status as a shareholder, just like those seated in the meeting room earlier. He warned them not to lie to him or treat him like a fool. He wouldn't be the one to suffer the consequences of deceit. He admitted he hadn't wanted to reveal himself in this manner. A part of him still valued the loyalty tied to their family bond, but he added coldly, they were still family, weren't they? At least in name. Chaniel shouted once more, his fury erupting like a volcano. He asked what all of this was, whether Chanoke had completely lost his sanity, and demanded to know what he was trying to achieve. Chanoke replied evenly that since their last encounter, he had been thinking deeply about his life. Reflecting on the misery he had endured, he realized he was no longer willing to live that way. He declared that he had returned with a purpose, to claim what was rightfully his. He stated firmly that he would no longer address Chaniel as his brother. From now on, he would refer to him as Chaniel. He expressed his intention to reclaim every single thing Chaniel had stolen from him. The comfortable life their family should have enjoyed, the position of father that had been taken for granted, and the rights he had been denied. All of it, he vowed, would be recovered, along with the interest he had paid in suffering. Chaniel, now completely unhinged, screamed in rage. He asked if Chanoke had just called him a thief and whether he wanted to die. He mocked him again, saying such boldness from a man without roots was laughable. He challenged him to a fight, daring him to prove just how far he could go, claiming that he would enjoy watching it all unfold. But Chanoke, undeterred, placed a hand on Chaniel's shoulder and calmly advised him to watch his language. He added that putting too much strain on his shoulders at his age might cause health problems. With deliberate irony, he warned that serious disease might not be far off. He then turned stern and warned that if Chaniel ever uttered the words man with no roots again, he would not let it slide. There would be consequences. The next moment, Chaniel lunged and grabbed him by the neck, attempting to strike him with a punch. Chanoke blocked the attack, shielding himself defensively. In a cold voice, he told Chaniel that he should fix his habit of swinging fists. Getting hit made his teeth clench now, thanks to someone's example. Just then, a staff member entered the room and was stunned by the scene unfolding before him. He hesitated, unsure of what to say, and then addressed the chairman hesitantly, asking what was going on. Chanoke immediately changed his tone, smiling as he looked at the staff member. He explained that the chairman had complained of shoulder stiffness, and he had merely been helping him with some stretches. He speculated that perhaps Chaniel had been overworking himself lately. Maybe he had secured a major investment. Looking at him now, he suggested the chairman should take care of his health and rest well. He reminded the chairman that everyone knew how important performance was to him, but illness would only slow him down. With a lighthearted tone, he told him to relax his shoulders and take it easy. He added that he had another meeting to attend and politely excused himself, saying he looked forward to working together again next time. As Chanoke exited, the staff member approached Chaniol with concern, asking whether he was all right. But Chaniol, still trembling with fury, yelled at him not to touch him. The staff member quickly apologized, and Chaniol instructed him to prepare the car. Later, Chaniol met with Minyong during a gym session. His emotions still boiling, he suddenly grabbed her by the neck mid-cardio. Confused and frightened, Minyong asked what was wrong and why he was acting that way. She pleaded for him to stop, crying that she couldn't breathe, he couldn't breathe, and begging him to let go. She repeatedly asked what was happening, but Chaniel remained silent for a moment. Then, pulling the phone from his pocket, he finally spoke. He said he was in a terrible mood because of a certain woman. He then revealed a photograph and held it in front of Minyong. It was a picture of Shin Ji. His voice dropped lower, darker. He warned that if she wanted to avoid harm, she needed to bring him every detail she could find about that woman. Minyong was intently studying a photo of Shin Ji, her mind swirling with questions and reflections. She wondered aloud what had gotten into that kid all of a sudden, and had changed so drastically to make him behave the way he was now. She suspected that it was the issue of speed, the driving problem behind his recent erratic actions and strange demeanor. Her words carried a tone of puzzlement and concern. Nearby, Chaniel, curious about what she was saying, asked if she really knew Shin Ji and why she hadn't shared all this information with him before. He pressed her for details, eager to understand the full story. Minyong hesitated for a moment, then began to explain everything as best as she could remember. She admitted it had been a long time ago, even before she was divorced from her husband. She recalled that her ex-husband had suddenly brought a troubled girl to the house, seemingly out of nowhere and completely on his own accord. He had let her stay in the house for a few days, though Minyong did not know exactly why. Her ex-husband had told her that the girl's parents had died in a tragic accident, and was the extent of the information she had about the girl's background. The story was so deep and complicated that Minyong felt it was difficult to ask too many questions. The atmosphere around that event was heavy, and she respected the sensitive nature of the situation. After a few days, the girl had simply left the house without any warning or explanation. Since then, Minyong had no idea what had happened to her or where she had gone. This was all she knew, and she shared these facts with Chaniol honestly. Chaniol listened intently and then asked why the girl had left. He wondered whether she had done something wrong or if there had been a conflict. He suggested that if the problem was related to the girl herself, it would have been quicker to confront or ask her directly. He also said that if the issue involved that particular person, he was certain he would still be in contact with her and could find out more. He even offered to investigate and find her if necessary. But after a moment, he changed his mind and told Minyong to forget about it. Perplexed, Minyong asked why he was dismissing the matter so quickly. Chaniel then began to open up about his current feelings of hopelessness and frustration. He confessed that he felt deeply unwell emotionally because nothing was going the way he had hoped or planned. He regretted allowing certain people to become involved in his company, as their presence had led to serious problems. The company's stock price was falling sharply, largely due to investors who were connected to his father gradually withdrawing their investments. This cascading loss of support was extremely troubling and weighing heavily on him. Minyong, trying to uplift his spirits, told him that no matter what happened, she believed he would succeed in the end. She reminded him that he had his father's blood running through his veins, implying that strength and resilience were part of his heritage. Suddenly, Chaniel's phone rang, interrupting the lighthearted moment. He sighed heavily, knowing that the troubles would not leave him alone. Answering the call with a trace of frustration in his voice, he demanded to know whether the person on the other end had found the girl. He was clearly irritated, emphasizing how difficult it was to locate her. Minyong, overhearing the conversation, became concerned and asked if something was seriously wrong. Chaniel looked worried, but chose not to disclose more details at that moment. Far away from this conversation in the grand and imposing mansion, a congressman was engaged in a gaming session with a young lady. He commented on how peaceful the place was and noted that such calmness was a rare sight. Then, somewhat scolding, he told the young lady she should have listened to him earlier. He called her senseless for being so exhausted and joked about how little stamina young people had these days compared to older generations. He warned her that their game was not yet finished and that if she wanted to end it quickly, she needed to pull herself together so they could wrap things up. At that moment, two workers approached the congressman and politely informed him that a guest had arrived and was waiting outside. Known for his notoriously bad temper, the congressman asked what he should do next. One of the workers seemed confused and explained that he was simply following orders to notify the congressman as soon as the guest arrived. The congressman asked if the worker's supervisor was present. The supervisor stepped forward, confirming his presence. The congressman then asked how long the worker had been employed. The supervisor replied that it had been about a month. The congressman expressed disbelief that a month was not enough time to properly train the worker. He sharply reprimanded the supervisor, telling him it was unacceptable that the worker still lacked proper training. Suddenly, he grabbed an axe, causing tension to rise. He explained that the supervisor had rudely passed off his responsibilities to someone else, and because of that, the junior worker was now to blame. The congressman then threatened in a menacing tone, asking where he should cut, whether the supervisor's wrist or ankle. The atmosphere grew thick with fear and danger. The congressman demanded a response, but no one answered. The supervisor attempted to speak, but before he could finish his words, the congressman violently slashed his throat with the axe. The room fell into a chilling silence filled with terror. The congressman shouted at the others, questioning whether the supervisor had even educated the worker properly. He demanded quicker answers next time and reminded them that silence meant consent. His warning was clear. The patience of power was limited, and the consequences of failure were severe. He asked if they understood. The congressman then berated the group for lingering around when a guest had arrived. He ordered them to clean up the mess immediately or face harsh lessons. The workers hurriedly promised to comply. Adjusting his new shirt, the congressman left the room and instructed that the guest be allowed to enter. Chanol soon entered the congressman's office. The congressman greeted him with a mock apology for the wait. Chaniel responded politely, saying it was nothing, and then asked if the congressman liked the gift he had sent. The congressman admitted that he was not in a good mood. When Chaniel inquired whether something had happened, the congressman grumbled about a lady who appeared to be an ethnic Korean but could not speak well. He hinted that the lady did not meet his personal preferences. Chaniel found himself bowing his head in front of the congressman, apologizing for his carelessness. He admitted that he should have paid more attention and blamed his delinquency for getting ahead of him. The congressman, clearly displeased, expressed his disappointment, addressing him sternly as Chairman Cha. He asked coldly what had brought him there. In response, Chaniel explained that he had heard rumors regarding the transmission of company stocks and had come to confirm the validity of that information. The congressman, narrowing his gaze, questioned whether Chaniel truly believed the company he now operated had been founded solely by his deceased father. Chaniel quickly denied that assumption, acknowledging that such a feat would have been impossible without the congressman's help. However, the congressman reminded him sharply that everything he owned and did was under his own jurisdiction, not Chaniel's. Despite that, Chaniel still pressed on, arguing that such a significant move should have at least involved a consultation. But before he could finish, the congressman struck him across the face, his voice rising with anger. He scolded Chaniel for assuming he had earned his complete trust. Even though he carried his father's blood, the congressman had once believed he would surpass his single-minded father. That faith had led him to support Chaniel in everything he had requested. But now, seeing the current state of things, he questioned how much money he had invested into Chaniel's company and demanded an explanation as to why everything had fallen apart. He accused Chaniel of being a failure, claiming that none of it made sense anymore. Chaniel, feeling utterly humiliated, lowered himself further, apologizing with deep remorse. He begged for just one more chance, promising that this time he would prove himself. But the congressman, dismissive, asked what more he could expect from a man who once came to him claiming he would kill his own father just to take the throne. Back then, the congressman had believed him, moved by his courage. Yet now, seeing him kneeling over a mere stock issue, he wondered if his judgment had been flawed. Trying to defend himself, Chaniel insisted that no one else could have orchestrated this except for Chanoke. He questioned why the congressman would side with him. But the congressman shouted furiously, demanding he lower his voice and show respect in his presence. Chaniel quickly apologized again. The congressman told him that the conversation was over and that his decision would not be reversed. However, he added that he would offer Chaniel a piece of useful information. He had heard that Chaniel was searching for someone named Shin Ji. Surprised, Chaniel asked if the congressman knew that person. The congressman denied any personal knowledge of the individual and admitted that it was the first time he was hearing the name under such circumstances. However, he noted that Shinjoe seemed to be quite well known among stockbrokers, and something about the situation felt off. He remarked that it was peculiar for someone to operate under their real name in such circles, suggesting that something about it was suspicious. Then, turning a suspicious gaze toward Chaniel, he asked if he had been secretly manipulating the company's stock prices. Chaniel, shocked by the implication, denied it firmly, stating that if he had such intentions, he would never have acted without the congressman's knowledge. Accepting his response, the congressman decided to end the discussion. He advised Chaniel to return, remarking that merely kneeling and doing nothing wouldn't change the outcome. However, he reassured him that he had no intention of handing everything over to Chanoke immediately, as he also had plans in motion. He acknowledged the gift Chaniel had brought and expressed appreciation for it. Chaniel, nodding, politely excused himself and departed from the chairman's house. Outside, his manager was waiting beside his car and greeted him with a note of respect, telling him that he had worked hard. Chaniel, brushing off the compliment, asked her curtly to skip the formalities and report on the progress. The manager informed him that they were still investigating, but hadn't yet gathered enough information on Shin Ji. At her words, Chaniel's patience snapped. He slapped her hard across the face and yelled, demanding to know why she was even bringing up that girl when it was Chanoke she was supposed to be investigating. He expressed his frustration at having to explain every little detail and demanded a response from her. The manager, now in a miserable and shaken state from his outburst, apologized profusely and promised that she understood now and would begin the investigation immediately. Meanwhile, at the construction site, Chanoke was diligently working, carrying heavy materials across the area. One of his friends, seeing his effort, suggested he take a break. Chanoke responded with a nod, saying that he would rest soon after finishing the current task. His friend accepted that and jokingly called him Mr. as he turned away. Just then, Shin Ji appeared at the site, carrying a packed lunch in her hands. She greeted Chanoke cheerfully. Chanoke looked at her, concerned, noticing that her leg was injured. He asked why she had come all that way despite her condition. She smiled and told him that she had brought lunch for him. He looked at her with concern, mentioning that she must be exhausted and that preparing a meal must have been difficult for her. She brushed off his concern, suggesting that they go to a spot with a great view to eat together. He agreed and told her to lead the way, warning her not to lean on him too much or her clothes would get dirty. She laughed and said it was fine, reminding him that clothes could always be washed. Unbeknownst to them, Hanjin was nearby, hiding and quietly observing them. She raised her phone and snapped a photo of the two together. Later that day, Hanjin called Minjae. She asked what he was doing and reminded him that he didn't have any other plans for the day. She proposed that they meet at the park that night, promising to share something important with him. She urged him to wait for her there. That evening, she arrived at the park and waited for Minjae. When he arrived, He asked her curiously what was going on and why she had called him out at that hour. She responded with a grin, saying that it had been a while and that she was craving alcohol. She asked him to be her drinking buddy, offering to treat him. Min-jae frowned, reminding her that he hated drinking and declined her offer, suggesting she find someone else. He added that there were plenty of other things to enjoy besides alcohol. She replied confidently, joking that there would be no compensation for his company. Then, tilting her head with amusement, she asked again if he still didn't want to be her drinking buddy. She made it clear that this was something he wanted, whether he admitted it or not. With a playful smile, she told him it was perfectly fine to indulge just this once, and asked what he thought. Min-jae, now visibly flustered and a little thrilled, couldn't hide his excitement. He commented on how she had made the effort to look beautiful just for him, and admitted that with such charm, he could hardly say no. He agreed, and told her they should finish the conversation and start drinking. Then, remembering their surroundings, he warned her to keep her voice down in case someone overheard and started gossiping. But she dismissed his concern and boldly told him to forget everything and just come inside to drink. They went into the bathroom. He had asked her how she preferred to go about the cardio session, casually inquiring whether she needed any assistance from him. She didn't respond verbally at first, but instead handed over her handbag, prompting him to remark that it was fine. She should just hold on to it herself. There was a touch of awkwardness in the air as she explained that she was having stomach problems and feeling bloated, which made exercising uncomfortable. Though she often gave him advice because she genuinely cared for his well being, she pointed out that he never truly listened. He acted like he was simply hearing words passively, without letting any of it sink in. He responded curtly, saying that everything she said felt meaningless to him, dismissing her concern as though it held no value at all. After a brief wrestling session that left them both slightly breathless, he wiped sweat from his forehead and said he was feeling thirsty. Without waiting for her reply, he mentioned that he was heading out and encouraged her to come along quickly. He expressed a strong desire to have a drink and urged her to hurry, saying they should go already. She paused for a moment, internally questioning her own actions, wondering what she was doing and why she was even following along with this plan. Eventually, they both ended up at a bar. It didn't take long before he became entirely intoxicated, his words slurred, movements unsteady, and face flushed with alcohol. She watched him, concerned and slightly regretful, thinking to herself that she never intended to let him get this drunk. While sitting at the bar and trying to manage the situation, Hanjin's eyes drifted toward a figure in the distance. At first, she didn't recognize her, but upon closer inspection, she was taken aback to realize it was Minso. The surprise struck her deeply. Minso was not just any woman. She was the eldest daughter of Chanoke and Minyong, someone deeply tied to complicated family dynamics and personal histories. Minso approached her with a blunt expression and a voice laced with passive aggression. She asked Hanjin why she had run away earlier in such a hurry, remarking that it had been quite a while since they had last seen each other. She commented that it was incredibly difficult to come across her these days and reminded her, not so subtly, that she had warned her before not to approach Min-jae. She demanded to know what Hanjin was thinking now and why she had disregarded her warning. Trying to stay composed, Hanjin greeted her with a calm hi, and then, with a note of curiosity and hurt in her voice, asked Minso why she hated her so much. Her question was simple but heavy with years of unresolved tension. Minseo's reaction was sharp. She scoffed and told her not to confuse the situation. It wasn't about having some kind of inferiority complex. Her tone turned colder as she told Hyunjin not to touch her and added that even the thought of it disgusted her. Meanwhile, Min-jae was lying nearby, completely intoxicated and unconscious, unable to move or respond. Minso walked over to Min-jae and knelt down, trying to rouse him from his drunken stupor. In a barely audible whisper, Min-jae opened his eyes slightly, his voice weak and slurred, and called out to ask about her presence there. Chaniel had just stepped into his house, his footsteps echoing faintly through the silent hallway. As he entered the living space, he noticed his wife, Yoon-hui, sitting alone in the TV lounge. She looked distant, her expression unreadable, as she stared blankly at the screen. Without hesitation, he approached her, attempting to break the thick silence between them. He told her how long it had been since they last saw each other and confessed, with a gentle tone that bordered on pleading, that he had missed her dearly. Referring to her as Hyunjin's mother, he tried to reestablish some form of familiar connection. Yoon-hui, however, remained unmoved. Her face showed no emotion, and she didn't even glance in his direction. Still, he tried to lighten the mood, complimenting her on how charming she appeared, perhaps even more so when he only got to see her every few days. He pointed out that her injuries had finally healed, expressing concern by saying how worried he had been about her condition. But before he could move any closer, her voice cut through the room sharply, filled with rage and pain. She warned him not to touch her, making it clear that she had no intention of speaking even a single word to him. He froze momentarily, taken aback by the intensity of her rejection. Trying to mask his wounded pride, he asked why she was being so harsh with him, but Yunhui erupted, her voice rising as she questioned whether he was truly that clueless. She accused him of acting as if he didn't understand her pain. Reminding him bitterly, she said that being physically beaten by him had not been enough. Now she was also being held captive in this very house. She couldn't comprehend how he still expected her to behave as though nothing had ever happened. Chaniel, attempting to sound reasonable, dismissed her words, claiming she was exaggerating by saying she was trapped. But Yunhui scoffed at his attempt to downplay her experience. She demanded to know what he would call it if not imprisonment. She then accused him of locking her up in one of the farthest outbuildings, as if his intent had been to isolate her completely. If his goal had been to spoil her spirit, then she assured him he had succeeded, and in a mocking tone, she even congratulated him on the achievement. Instead of expressing regret, Chaniel laughed, brushing off her fury as if it were nothing more than melodrama. He told her that he had generously turned a blind eye to all of her past mistakes. He reminded her that he had given her a grand house, one that she could indulge herself in. Instead, all he received were accusations and yelling. But Yunhui refused to be pacified. She screamed at him not to touch her and challenged his narrative. She said she never asked him to ignore her actions or mistakes. If anything, he should have acknowledged the truth, but instead he chose to manipulate reality. She asked why he hadn't disguised the incident as an accident, just as he had done with his father. But of course, she said he hadn't done so because he feared she would expose all of his deeply buried secrets. That, she claimed, was also the reason he hadn't signed the divorce papers. Now, she declared firmly, this was his final warning. The air grew tenser. Chaniel's face hardened as anger surged through him. Without a word, he raised his hand and slapped her hard across the face. The sound echoed through the lounge like a violent punctuation to her words. His voice roared as he told her he had heard enough. He shouted at her to get out and accused her of misunderstanding his kindness. He claimed he had only ever treated her nicely for the sake of their daughter. He reminded her that she never listened until she was hit. Yunhui, tears brimming but defiant, responded with sharp sarcasm. She said it was amusing to hear him talk about caring for Hanjin because she hadn't even realized he remembered the child's birth. His concern, she said, was laughable at best. Chaniel demanded to know why she was laughing. He sneered and told her that she had grown strong enough to take more hits now, and with a sinister grin, he invited her to smile as they began another one of their fighting sessions. With no hesitation, he continued the abuse, beating her again and dragging her into one of the rooms, leaving behind only silence and the remnants of a shattered confrontation. On the other side of town, in a modest apartment, Chanoke was standing beside the bed of Shin Ji, who lay wrapped in her blankets, still fast asleep. He called out to her with playful insistence, telling her to rise and shine and warning her not to oversleep past 9 a.m. again and then blame it on a juicy. Half asleep, she groaned and mumbled that she just wanted to sleep a little longer, maybe just until tomorrow. He teased her gently, asking whether she was still growing, since she found it so difficult to wake up in the morning. Curious, he asked why she couldn't get up right away when he called her. Still clinging to her pillow, she explained that it wasn't because of sleepiness, but rather that she had stayed up really late. She mentioned something about the foreign marketplace and crypto trading, pointing out that it was a 24/7 affair. Perplexed, he asked what she meant by that, reminding her that most marketplaces closed early. He asked what exactly she had been doing so late at night and told her once again to avoid dabbling in cryptocurrency or anything of the sort. But she argued that crypto was the only thing without boundaries or time limits. He sighed, clearly aware that convincing her otherwise would be a lost cause. Resigning himself, he told her to get out of bed since he had cooked breakfast for her, thanked him for the meal, and they both moved to the dining table. As she took her first bite, she couldn't help but exclaim how delicious the food was. She curiously asked where he had learned to cook so well. He laughed and told her that he had picked up some culinary skills while doing various volunteer services. Occasionally, those opportunities came through volunteer centers, and he enjoyed helping out. As she continued eating, he told her to just leave the dishes in the sink. He would clean them once he returned. Wondering where he was off to, she asked him about his plans. He replied that a friend had asked for help and that he was going to lend a hand. He added that doing good things for others always left a good feeling. She smiled and wished him a safe trip.